What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and this one will break down what's going on with the overall market, what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm going to talk about SPY, Nvidia, Tesla, the QQQ, and many different tickers, and talk about what the data is suggested for the market, so I do predict to happen going into Monday and beyond. But before breaking things down about all this information, before I talk about what's going on with the overall market, I do have to mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. We sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account. You are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. All right, guys, I want to talk about the market now, what's going on with the technicals and what's going on with the data. So I'm going to try to make this video kind of quick because, once again, I did talk about a lot of these tickers yesterday. But anyways, let's talk about the market now. So for the data, there's not really any major data coming out for tomorrow. So that's one of the first times in a while there's nothing like too massive coming out. But for tomorrow, earnings is going to have a big role. Now the market moves during the after hours and also going into Tuesday and Wednesday. So for Monday, we have First Bank and just a couple of other banks out there. For Tuesday, we have Bank of America, we have Charles Schwab, Morgan Stanley, and etc. For Wednesday, then we have Goldman Sachs, and we have Ally Bank, and we have the Nasdaq, and then we have big tech stocks now starting to report earnings starting on Wednesday, like Tesla. We have IBM, and the list goes on. And then after that, we also have other big stocks reporting earnings too, so they're going to be very important. But I think Wednesday is going to be the biggest day for earnings of the week because of Tesla and IBM, and just be ready for more volatility, in the overall market because of these. Now, with that said, there's not a whole lot that's affecting the market tomorrow in terms of like news or data. So I do believe technicals are going to be ruling over, and right now technicals are suggesting the market's going to get a pullback very soon. Now, why do I say this? And do I promise this? Well, let me first mention that I like to go over the bull and bear cases just to prepare you guys for anything, but I'm not just going to be fixated on that very ambiguous way of detailing the market, right? So I'm not going to just give you guys the bull and bear cases. I'm also going to give you guys my prediction as well. All right, so just stay tuned for when I speak. Don't just like click away the second I give both cases. So on SPY, the first thing you need to notice is there's this bearish divergence on the RSI and also on the MACD that has been developing. We're starting to see the RSI hitting these lower highs despite the higher high developing on the chart. On top of this, from a technical standpoint, I know the RSI is not always the most reliable and sole way of looking at the levels the market's at, but it is suggesting that the market has been overbought for quite a while, and we're likely going to see a retracement because of that. On top of this, we got a very nice rejection candle on the 4-hour time frame, suggesting that the market may start to cool off. And the PPO on SPY is about to get a crossover, okay? So these are all suggesting downside is likely to come. If you're bullish, you want to see this thing break 452.5. If that happens, it could start flying even higher. And we need to get a weekly close above like 453 or so for us to remain more bullish. Now, if we're bearish, we need to get this bearish cross in the PPO, and we're going to see the market break down below 448. If that happens, it's likely going to come all the way down to fill this gap around 446. And if it continues to break down, there's another gap all the way down here on like the 442 level. 442 to 443 around here. This zone is likely going to be tested if that ends up breaking down too. So that's the more bull and bear case. What do I think is more likely? Considering the bearish divergence has developed and how much the market pumped without really getting much of a retracement for the past week, right? I think the odds favor, and I'm leaning more bearish going into tomorrow. I think the market's going to cool off. We're going to see SPY come all the way down to at least 448 or lower than that. I think the market's going to eventually start filling some of these gaps. I'm leaning more in that direction. I'm going to be watching the 50 EMA on the 4-hour time frame, which is currently around 443. I think the market's going to retrace, and I'm leaning more bearish, at least just for SPY for tomorrow. And then going into tomorrow for Tesla, I actually have a different view on Tesla, however. The thing about Tesla is it also has this bearish divergence that has been developing. But remember, we're approaching earnings for Tesla, and Tesla already cooled off quite a bit. It was underperforming compared to the market for quite a while before this thing started to pump just a little bit. Now, my view of Tesla is this. When the volume starts to come back in, we're likely going to see more buying pressure, but the market could slow it down just a little bit because the market is running on a very similar algorithm. So for that reason, I think looking at this bearish divergence, we might see Tesla kind of like gap down to maybe cool off just a little bit, maybe come back down, maybe not to this imbalance, but maybe come down like to like the very mid to high like 270s, then try to bounce off of that. And it's going to make an attempt to break out above 282. If that breaks, watch 285. If it gets above this entire zone, right, this resistance zone right over here around this like 282 to 285 area, this entire zone, break to a new high for Tesla, and it's going to likely push all the way up to 295 to $300. It's very, very possible, and I do believe the odds favor that happening over the next couple of days. Typically, Tesla pumps very nicely approaching earnings. I have a feeling there's a good chance that's going to happen. I also want to add that we have this cup and handle like structure that has been developing. It's looking more bullish from the technical side, and I think the odds favor maybe a slight cool off in the pre market tomorrow before this thing continues to run. And I think Tesla's going to make its way all the way up to at least 290 at the very least, but watch for confirmation just to be safe. I do think the market could slow Tesla down a bit. It's going to like get in the way of it to some degree, but I do believe it's going to try to break to the 290s and make its way up to at least 295 right before earnings, because there's going to be lots of hype and lots of excitement from lots of investors. I believe it's going to pump, and I'm leaning more bullish on Tesla for tomorrow and also approaching Tuesday and Wednesday. For Aapl, I think that Aapl is forming this nice accumulation phase, but it's very sideways, not really picking much of a direction. We're going to see how it tests this 50 EMA. I think it's going to test the 50 EMA around this 189 level. If it breaks below this, it's going to come all the way down to 188.5, then potentially 187.5. So you have the levels right here. And to be bullish, you need to see it break above 191.7. It's kind of stuck right now. It's been stuck going back and forth for quite a while. So I'm going to be watching it remain tight for the time being. My gut tells me it's just going to be stuck in trade sideways for now, so I'm not really seeing too much happening to it. For the triple Q, I'm leaning more bearish on it, just to be honest with you all. If you want to be bullish, you need to see it break 382.86. If you want to be bearish, you need to see it break below 377.5. I think it's going to come down to fill this gap down here around this like 373 area, and that's because of what the MACD is looking like on the 4-hour time frame, about to get this bearish cross, and because we're losing some momentum after forming a bearish divergence right about here. So that's telling me that we might see this thing cool off a little bit. And the bearish divergence, by the way, is on the MACD. In case you guys missed it, it's on the MACD right about here. I think we have a very, very big rejection wick right here. We're going to see the market retrace just a little bit in a very healthy manner. But that does not mean the market's done with. It's just a very healthy pullback before it could try to bounce later. That's going to depend heavily on earnings going into the future. But for now, I see a slight pullback for the next like day or so. And I do believe we're going to see the QQQ make its way down to like the 373 area, if not 375. For Nvidia, it's about to get a bearish cross in the PPO. I want to note about Nvidia that this thing is going to likely fly to around $500 sometime in August. At least there's lots of big money betting on that. But I don't think that there's confirmation of Nvidia being done with the drop just yet. So in my opinion, I think that Nvidia could retrace a little bit more. It might come down to about 455, maybe a little bit lower. I think it's going to try to chop around this area, maybe drop a little bit more because of the market. It could come down to fill this gap down here on this like 440 area, and then it may try to bounce afterwards and start pumping very nicely in August. I think there's going to be a lot of hype associated with earnings. We may see this thing run very close to $500. I think there's a very good chance it's going to go for 500. Before that happens, though, it may slow down a bit. It may gap down, remain kind of sideways for the time being with the market. I'm going to be watching this 440 area. I think it can drop a little bit more before it tries to bounce. For Microsoft, it's the same thing with Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft is still holding up nicely. We're getting closer to earnings. But one thing worth noting is there's not a whole lot going on with this technical stance. We're going to be watching 350 as our major resistance and 340 as our major support, around 343 especially. And that's this gap down here around 342. So my gut tells me it's going to come down to fill this gap, retrace just a little bit, and try to bounce off like 340 or so. That's the direction I'm leaning in. And I'm going to be watching this gap very carefully. Finally, when it comes to AMD, I'm still leaning more bullish overall on AMD. But before it continues to pump, we may see it retrace a little bit more looking at this trend because of its RSI, looking at the declining momentum on its overall PPO. I believe AMD may retrace to about this 114 area, retrace just a little bit with the mark, maybe 113.5, then try to hold. I think it's going to be testing the 50 EMA support and try, kind of like chop around here for a bit. And then later on, it may try to bounce. If it breaks above 118, if we get a clean break above 118, we're going to be watching this imbalance. This imbalance level right here is on this 118 level. If it breaks above that, if it gets above 120, we have this next imbalance all the way up around 125. And I think it's going to come up to 125. If we break and hold 120, there's going to be a very good chance of this thing running. It's also forming a nice accumulation structure, so I'm leaning more bullish. I do believe it may retrace a little bit first before it starts to continue to pump, so I'm leaning more bullish overall on it. But for now, there's a good chance it may kind of like cool off a bit first before that happens. So watch the 50 EMA as major support and be very, very careful. To add on to this, for Netflix, it's trying to hold above the 50 EMA, may try to bounce a little bit off this and get very close to where this big change in momentum was. However, on the 4-hour time frame, we have this bearish cross right here on the PPO, so it may try to bounce a little bit in the pre-market, then work its way down. I do believe it may make its way down to the 430s first before it tries to really bounce. So I do believe there's a good chance of that happening, and there is this bearish divergence as well on our different time frames. And I think the market may cause Netflix to cool off into the 434 area, if not even lower than that. So watch for a slight cool off before this thing tries to bounce. Be very, very careful. For the Nasdaq, it's the same thing. I mean, it's been forming this bearish divergence, and I think it's going to start filling some of these gaps, especially this one right here at the very least around the very high 13,000s. I think that's going to lead to more retracing in the market. So watch that very carefully. The dollar also ended up pumping a little bit, and it got a nice bounce off this. It was very, very oversold, and we got a bullish cross on the 4-hour PPO, and we have this imbalance up here on this 101 area. We might start to see the dollar pump a little bit, and this is going to help the market cool off. So watch the dollar carefully. Good chance that's going to happen. For Coinbase, I'm more bullish on Coinbase overall, but I think it could cool off a little bit more and make its way back down to around this 100 area. Also has this imbalance down here around this 84 area. So it's going to come all the way down there. I'm not too sure about it dropping that low, but I could see it make its way down to about 100 and trying to fight for 100 very soon. If it breaks below 100, we're going to be watching some of these support levels. Let me just break down where they are. We have quite a bit of support on this thing. We have support around 100. Below that, watch 197.5, 193 below that, and some very important levels. I think 100 at the very least will be retested. Then this thing may try to bounce. But later on, right, I think later on in the future, we're going to see this thing start pumping again to some crazy high numbers thanks to this squeeze ability. On Google, I believe Google has 127 as its resistance, and it actually held up quite decently. It also has this imbalance around this 129 level is where it has resistance. It actually came very close to this imbalance level already. So I think Google is going to either try to make its way up to 129 very soon. It may retrace first because of how the market is going to likely cool off. I'm going to be watching a retest of about 125. If that breaks, watch 123, then 121. But I think it could come down to 123 or so and then try to bounce after that. I'm going to be watching for a slight retracement before this thing tries to continue to go higher. And eventually, if it does retrace, it's going to try to make its way back up to 127. If that breaks, 129.5 could come later on. But it's probably not going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to be leaning more towards the future, maybe a little bit later. So just be patient with it. I'm going to be watching for a slight retracement first before this thing tries to continue to move up. Now we have Amazon. Amazon's looking pretty nice because Amazon managed to break out of this channel it's been stuck in for many, many weeks. The whole back and forth thing is starting to slow down on Amazon, so that's a good sign for it. Now, looking at how it closed on Friday, it looks like we're going to see a retracement on Amazon to 132.6. It may retrace a little bit, then try to bounce, make its way back up to about 135 afterwards. But I'm going to be looking for a small retracement on Amazon because we're losing momentum on the MACD. So it may retrace a little bit, then try to make its way right back up very, very soon. For Meta, this thing was looking weak. I called this out a little bit ago, but then I said something a little bit different on Friday because of how the market was looking, and we ended up getting a very sideways day before it's continuing to drop. Now, what happened to Meta was we got some negative news involving the threads that came out, and that's part of why it ended up cooling off a bit. In my opinion, Meta is going to likely retest a very important level. If it breaks below this 307 support, this is a very important support. If that breaks, it's going to come all the way down most likely to the very low 300s. That's a very important support. We could see this thing retrace quite a bit and get very close to our 50 EMA, which is going to likely be around the low 300s if we do get a big break to the downside. Now, if it tries to bounce, you're going to be watching this 310, 312, and 316 area as our resistance. What does my gut say? I think getting the bearish cross on the PPO, the odds favor this thing retesting 307, potentially coming down to 305 or so, and it may retrace even lower into the lower 300s, 303. I think there's a good chance of that happening, but it could bounce a little bit later moving forward. So please watch these levels very carefully on Meta. I think it may actually retrace a little bit, so watch 307. I think it may continue to drop before it bounces later on. So that's why I'm leaning more towards on Meta, and that's basically my analysis of the market for now. All right, so I hope this was helpful. I am leaning more bearish on SPY and the QQQ. I think a lot of stocks in the market, especially on the tech side, are going to be slowing down. And this next earnings cycle is going to have a big effect on our Nasdaq and many other stocks. However, one of the stocks I'm going to be eyeing for this week is Tesla. I think there's a good chance Tesla could start uptrending just like this, but we need confirmation first just to be safe. I am anticipating a nice uptrend on Tesla. I think it's going to try to break out. I think lots of volume is going to be coming to Tesla. And I think there's a good chance we're going to be retesting at least 285. If it breaks, then yes, I'm going to be leaning a lot more bullish. And I do believe that's going to happen. So I just want to call out Tesla. I think there's a good chance that all of these bullish pieces of news, all the hype associated with earnings is going to help this thing pump a bit. But then after earnings, this thing could always make a big move afterwards to either the upside or the downside, depending on how earnings goes. So you can see right here, it could gap up big time and just start pumping, or it could just gap down and start tanking. Not too sure about which way it's going to go there, but I do want to mention that there's a good chance it's going to try to uptrend approaching earnings. It tends to happen. Typically, that happens like more than 80% of the time. And I do believe Tesla has a lot of potential to outperform the market, in my opinion. All right, guys, so thank you all so much for listening. Have an absolutely spectacular rest of the day. Remain calm, cool, and collected, and do what you have to do. I want to keep this one kind of short, so that's it for this one. Enjoy your Sunday. The market to the moon as the long term is still incredibly bright, and peace out.